Want to know what's coming in behind them.
The effect on the ground is the people in the villages don't see us handing out stuff. I mean, there will be an element of that, but they see the key services they want that they have identified coming from Jura.
In this jargon-filled world, the aim of Nick Burrows, who's called a stabilisation advisor, is to build authority for Giroa, the government of Afghanistan.
If we can have a stabilisation effect with it, then we should really push that.
What's happening in Helmand now could determine the fate of the whole Afghan project.
Right, let's rock and roll.
Stabilisation is a radical new direction in aid policy. Rather than schools and hospitals, the priority instead is on policing and the rule of law. The idea is that if you build legitimate government, then other services will follow. It was not done when the Taliban fell in 2001, since US leaders believed then that elections would bring their own stability and did not do enough to build clean government, with the result that a corrupt elite became entrenched in power. Stabilisation aims to change that.
Success will look like basic systems of governance established across the main population centres of this province, increased numbers of judges and prosecutors so that the process of law can take place, Afghan security forces leading operations, planning operations.
And here are signs of how much things are changing. Outside the local council office, refurbished with British aid money, young southern Pashtuns are brought by their fathers to sign up to join the army, until recently seen here as an alien northern force. And traders line up for licences to operate in a new bazaar. The district council still feels new. The trick for the stabilisation advisor is to try to build Afghan authority and accountability for decisions taken, while still paying the bills.
I have, having talked with you last week, put together a map with all the projects which you propose to do for this year's budget.
This may not look like Westminster politics, but it is a kind of democracy, and it has a deadly earnest, bringing an alternative government to what the Taliban offered. There are a small group of women on the council, casting aside the shapeless mass of the burqa as they come in. Making improvements in women's lives remains the toughest challenge.
Where is all that plastic gone, though?
Well, I suspect.
Because we paid extra for that.
Someone local has said, do you think all that plastic is going to go to a bunch of women in a women's centre? You're joking, not when we've got none.
But we've had no reports of theft or anything from here.
On his rounds, Nick Burrows goes to a women's centre with Major B. Bryan, where none of the projects funded by British money has come good. Things in Afghanistan never quite turn out as you expect. Over there should be a goat pen, and here a greenhouse where there should be the beginnings of tomatoes germinating, but there's no goat pen, no goats, and the plastic sheeting has gone from the greenhouse. Elsewhere, we found water pumps lying unused in a field, frustrating for some in the military who want to hand them out for quick impact. But managing aid money involves tough decisions about consequences.
At the moment, we're holding back a little bit on the water pumps so that we understand exactly what's needed in the communities and that we don't draw too much water from a particular area. We want to work with communities rather than work with individuals. I think that's the key thing to success.
Okay.
Back at base, three men come from a village asking for a hydropower generator.
If I just give away money, I'm a fool.
Yeah.
But if I work with the community, I'm a friend of Afghanistan and I'm a wise man.
Yes.
Nick persuades them to pay for labour and basic building materials in return for Britain supplying the generator.
Well, I hope what we're doing is very much working not from our perspective, but from the Afghan government's perspective. That is the strand and the key to success in Helmand, and certainly in this district, rather. Clearly, if you're a subsistence farmer, someone in a rural area, you really need to be able to see a benefit.
I meet the women councillors later at an event called to talk about reform in justice, which lies at the core of the new stabilisation policy. It takes courage for women to stand for office here. Fatima's husband was murdered when she stood for Parliament and her son kidnapped for a while during the campaign. So what does she want for women?
There are two things I want to say.
The first thing is there should be jobs created for those Afghan women who are sitting at home and have no job. They should have their rights. The second thing is that we are happy that the old practice of families handing over young girls to settle disputes has reduced a lot. I would like to thank the security forces for preventing it.
Alongside copies of the Afghan constitution, cartoon books are handed out at this event, condemning child abuse, wife-beating and bad treatment of workers. Human rights are cloaked in the language of Islam. For example, under Islamic Sharia law, the practice of handing over young girls to settle disputes is banned. Stabilisation involves acceptance of Sharia as protection against the worst of traditional tribal customs, and not the threat to liberty as it's often seen in the West. Anything would be better than the corruption in the justice system that's been allowed to develop since the international takeover of Afghanistan in 2001. An own goal, giving the Taliban the chance to project themselves as alternative providers of swift and not corrupt justice. And after those wasted years, judges find themselves competing for cases with Taliban courts, particularly where it involves the protection of women.
The mullahs should go and preach that some traditional customs are against the law and natural rights and against Islam. And that will make a difference. For example, it is against the law for men to abuse their wives. If men come to court for abusing women, we will punish them.
And in the front line of justice reform lie Helmand's police, once famous as predatory, corrupt, drug-addicted bandits. Those who work with them say that's changing.
It's an optimism based on the pragmatics of seeing an Afghan security force, particularly the police nowadays, who have gone from being part of the problem or even the problem to now very firmly part of the solution, if not the clear solution to the security problems of Central Helmand.
British commanders like Colonel Doogie Graham now view Afghan commanders as partners who already take the lead in many operations.
If the help we've received this year in developing and arming and equipping our force continues for another 3 to 4 years, then we'll be able to stand on our own feet and provide security for ourselves as long as they continue to send us arms.
They are building democracy from the ground up here. And when Afghans gather, the political argument is often conducted at full volume. But at least it's argument and not fighting. And when grievances are aired, the political geography has changed. Until quite recently, at meetings like this, British officers would have been in the hot seat taking the complaints. Now they're in the back row, observers as Afghan officials manage their own affairs. While aid is focused now on the basic building blocks of society, justice, governance, taxation and trade, the Taliban have not gone away. A trip out by Royal Engineers to visit a road building project they're in charge of still needs a heavily armed escort. But a year ago, British troops were fighting for this ground, half an hour's drive west of Lashkargah. One sign of the change of atmosphere, the foreman of this British-financed road-building project was until recently a local Taliban commander. Sultan Mohammed said the Taliban were getting weaker and weaker, so he left for this well-paid work. Ancient asphalt boiling machinery is working overtime to keep up with demand. And not just to hard-top the main highways. For the first time, rural communities across Helmand are being linked up with good roads and making trade possible. And there are new lock gates at an irrigation canal, a new entrance for a new airport, a grain storage warehouse, all part of the most expensive public building programme yet undertaken by the Royal Engineers. As well as access for health, education and farm goods, the new roads make it harder for the Taliban to bury bombs. power is shifting in Helmand, perhaps towards that elusive tipping point when locals believe the new Afghan government will outlast the Taliban threat. Higher force density, more effective aid and better political advisors and Afghan officials. It could all mark the beginning of a different future for Helmand.
David Loyne in Afghanistan. Now, before the papers, a word about tomorrow's programme. The